This story isn't easy to tell, but it needs to be heard. I grew up in a small Nigerian village, where everyone knew everyone. Family was everything, and in our Igbo tradition, we were taught to respect and protect one another. But what happens when the danger isn't from the outside? What happens when the person you're supposed to trust the most becomes the monster in the story? My name is Ifani, and I'm the firstborn in a family of 5. Growing up, our home was simple but happy. My parents worked hard, my father was a farmer, and my mother sold goods at the market. I had 2 younger siblings, my brother, Chibuzo, and my sister, Amara. Amara was the baby of the family, always smiling, always full of life. She was everyone's favorite, especially my father's. At first, it didn't seem strange. Fathers love their daughters, don't they? He would buy her treats from the market, carry her on his shoulders, and call her Ada my daughter. But as I got older, I started noticing things that didn't feel right. When Amara turned 7, she stopped playing outside as much. She became quiet, withdrawn. She would flinch when someone raised their voice, even if it wasn't directed at her. My mother chalked it up to her being shy, but I knew Amara. This wasn't shyness. This was fear. One night, I woke up to the sound of muffled crying. Our house wasn't big, just 2 rooms divided by a thin wall, so you could hear everything. The crying was coming from my parents' room. I tried to ignore it, but something told me to get up. I tiptoed to the door and peeked through the crack. What I saw made my blood run cold. My father was sitting on the edge of the bed, his hand gripping Amara's wrist. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. He was whispering something to her, but I couldn't make out the words. The next morning, I tried to talk to Amara. "What happened last night?" I asked her. She shook her head, her eyes wide with panic. "Nothing," she whispered. "Don't tell anyone." I didn't know what to do. I was only 13 at the time, just a boy myself. How do you confront your own father? I convinced myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe I hadn't seen things clearly. But deep down, I knew the truth. The signs became harder to ignore. Amara started wetting the bed, something she hadn't done since she was a toddler. She avoided my father whenever she could, staying close to my mother or me. I tried to protect her, but I didn't know how. My mother, bless her heart, was too busy with work to notice anything was wrong. One day, I came home early from school. My parents thought I was still in class, so they didn't expect me. As I approached the house, I heard voices, Amara's and my father's. She was begging him for something, her voice trembling. "Please, Papa, I don't want to," she cried. "You will do as I say," he barked. I burst into the room without thinking. My father stood over Amara, his face twisted in anger. Amara was crouched in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees. The room fell silent as they both turned to look at me. "What are you doing here?" my father demanded. "I could ask you the same thing," I shot back, my voice shaking. For a moment, he just stared. After my father left the room, I ran to Amara. She was trembling, her face wet with tears. I held her close, trying to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop shaking. "Amara, what's going on? What is he doing to you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer immediately. She just kept sobbing, her little hands clutching at my shirt like she was afraid I'd leave her. Finally, she whispered, "He makes me do things, bad things." I felt my stomach twist. I was too young to fully understand what she meant, but I knew it was wrong. I knew it was something no father should ever do to his child. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. I wanted to tell my mother, but a part of me was scared. What if she didn't believe me? What if she blamed Amara, or worse, blamed me? My father was a respected man in the village. People looked up to him. Who would believe us? But I couldn't keep quiet. The next morning, I told my mother. I pulled her aside while Amara was playing outside and told her everything I had seen and heard. At first, she just stared at me, like she couldn't process what I was saying. Then she shook her head. Ifeanyi, don't say such things about your father. He's a good man. He loves this family. I know, Mama, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But you need to see what's happening. Amara is scared of him. She doesn't even want to be in the same room with him. Please, just watch her. You'll see. My mother didn't say anything after that, but I could tell the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few days, my mother started paying more attention to Amara. She noticed how Amara flinched whenever my father called her. She noticed the way Amara avoided his touch, the way she never looked him in the eye. I could see the realization dawning on her, and it terrified her. One night, after my father had gone to bed, my mother called me and Amara into the kitchen. She knelt down in front of Amara and held her hands. Amara, my child, she said gently, I need you to tell me the truth. Has your father been hurting you? Amara hesitated, her eyes darting between me and my mother. Then she nodded. My mother's face crumpled. She pulled Amara into her arms, holding her tightly as tears streamed down her face. I'm so sorry, my daughter. I'm so sorry. The next day, my mother sent me and Amara to stay with our aunt in a neighboring village. She didn't explain much, just told us to pack our things and leave quickly. Before we left, she hugged us both and whispered, I'll take care of this. I didn't know what she meant, but I trusted her. A week later, we heard the news. My father had been arrested. My mother had gone to the village elders and told them everything. They didn't want to believe her at first, but when Amara told her story in front of them, they couldn't ignore it. The elders called the police, and my father was taken away in handcuffs. Life wasn't easy after that. People in the village whispered about us, some blaming my mother for ruining the family, others blaming my father for his actions. But I didn't care. Amara was safe, and that was all that mattered. This story isn't just mine, it's a reality for so many children who suffer in silence. If you see something wrong, speak up. If someone you love is hurting, believe them. Silence only protects the abuser, never the victim. As an Igbo proverb says, Ebe oni dora ko chi ekwaturia, where a person falls is where their God will lift them. It's up to us to lift each other up and protect the ones who cannot protect themselves.